Greetings, I'm Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this 35th scale Vickers Armstrong Mk F 45, which is a variant of the Vickers 6-ton. This Mirage hobby kit is also a variant on the 6-ton kit rather than an entirely new kit, and that is quite evident when you look at what's in the box. First up, we have some hull parts and bogies, and a gun mantlet. This one is not relevant to this particular kit. These actually look pretty good and neat. There are of course mold lines and a little bit of flash here and there. Unfortunately, not all the sprues in this kit are this good. That said, this sprue is still pretty decent. Not all that many parts from this one were used. It seems like you could probably build the original kit, which is a plain 6-ton, I assume, if for some reason you didn't want to build this as a Mk F. Either way, you will certainly get plenty of parts left over for the bits box. I'm sure the bits box is pleased by that. I would be if I was a bits box. You might notice this sprue is a different colour. That's not a complaint, it's just an observation. All it really means is they used a different colour plastic when they made this one. A lot of these parts are used in this kit, so I guess they're Mk F parts, so it makes sense that they're a different colour anyway. They would have been made at a different time. More parts here. Some you will use, some you won't. These are some of the better moulded parts. They're mostly neat and straight. I can't speak to the accuracy of the detail, what with my not being an expert, or rivet counter, or anything like that, but I assume it ends up looking like what it's meant to look like. Though I will say that the build didn't quite end up looking like what's on the box. It looks similar, but not the same. This sprue is the worst in the box. It's got some really bad flash. I say that as though you can't see it. I guess this particular tooling got used quite a lot. The good news is that a lot of the parts on this sprue aren't going to be used in this case. The other problem with this sprue is that it doesn't have a letter to tell you which one it is. Consistent numbering and marking on the sprues and instructions is pretty good. I like when they have that. In this case, they sort of do, and sort of don't. Kind of annoying. This sprue is yet another colour. The wheels on this look better than some of the others, though again, not all of them are used. Like I said, there's going to be a lot left over with this kit. When I first looked at what was in this box, I thought this was the worst thing. The dreaded rubber band tracks. And to be fair, I didn't like them, but they didn't really give me as much grief as I was expecting. Here's the decals. These are Finnish markings. Is that what the F stands for? Mk F for Finland? Here's the instructions with the baggie of decals stapled to it. These aren't too bad. Old Herbert did find some bits a bit confusing, and there were some problems with parts not having numbers or letters, which I guess is consistent with the sprues being labelled in different ways. Kind of annoying, but you can work your way through it. Let's get to it. I start with the main gun. I thought I would be fancy and drill the barrel out. With the benefit of hindsight, it's probably not really worth the effort, but it's not exactly a hard thing to do, so I'm not going to cry too much. I am going to cry a bit, but not that much. I glue the gun into the inner mantlet part, which has to be done from the inside. That assembly can then be inserted into the outer mantlet part, again from the inside. There is a backing part here which initially didn't fit. The instructions do kind of note that it has to be cut to fit, but at first, at least to old Herbert, that was a bit unclear. If you're going to glue everything into place like I am, you could just omit this. Next, I glue this thing into the recess on the underside of the gun barrel. You may need to kajigger it a bit to get it centered. And then, this little flappy thing. This is how the instructions seem to want it, whatever it is, so that's how I did it. Turret ring time. There's a recess here, into which you glue the bottom of the turret stowage bin. And why not immediately follow that by gluing that assembly into the turret? Nothing too tricky here. The next step is a little bit unusual. You have to glue the locking tab mechanism into place. This isn't difficult, just a little bit odd. These would usually be moulded into the turret bottom. There's no keying, so I would suggest paying attention to your positioning. Make sure that it's actually going to lock the turret in place in the position you want it. I wasn't quite paying enough attention to this, and you'll see the result of that later. I then glue the gun assembly into place. This has no keying, so you have to eyeball it and try to line it up with the turret part as best you can. The two hatch parts then go into place with no issue. These parts are identical, so you don't need to worry about which half goes on which side. Just try to put them the right way up. Then a pair of periscopes to finish the turret, like two cherries on top, or something. And that's the turret completed. It doesn't look exactly like what's shown on the box, but it doesn't look too bad. It is what the instructions instructed, and they wouldn't lead me astray, surely. Now it's time to assemble a variety of wheels. These are return rollers. You can tell because of how return rollery they are. The pin on the inner half is a good way to identify them too. This one looks similar, but it is different. This is one of the road wheels. It's a little bit different to the other road wheels, and sits in the front or rear of each bogie. The rest of the road wheels look like this one, and it is quite a bit different. I'm not sure how important this is, but it's what the instructions want. The idler wheel has a pin that goes in the centre. You'll need this if you want to mount them on the hull. It says not to glue them, but I don't need moving idler wheels, so I glue all the parts together like so. And last, but certainly not least, the drive sprockets. These pins in the middle confused old Herbert at first, and I've not quite done it right in this shot, but I did eventually get them together properly. The pins shouldn't interfere with each other. It really made sense to assemble the bogies next, so that's what I did. I start by adding these support doodads. I had to trim back the guide pins on these to make them fit properly, which was kind of annoying. They're not going to be too visible, so it's not a big deal. I then add the wheels. First, these 3 wheels. They do fit into the mounts easily enough, though they'll probably need a bit of nudging to get them to sit nice and straight. The different, darker coloured wheel goes on this end. I've no idea why this is, just that it is. I then add the other half of the bogie frame and kajigga everything so it's as straight and neat as I can get it. It's not perfect, and may need some additional cleanup before being installed, but as long as the axle bit can fit through the hole there, it should be fine. I then began assembling the hull, which is fine, but unbeknownst to old Herbert, there is a bit of cutting that has to be done, and it would probably be a bit easier to do this before putting the hull together. Hindsight is 20/20, as the youth say. The hull parts do go together without too much fuss, and everything seems nice and neat and straight, which is pretty much what you want in a hull. Once it was all together, I noticed the instructions wanted these upper portions of the hull sides cut down, which I did in a fairly rough fashion. It worked for me, but you might choose to be a bit more careful. I use the replacement parts for test fitting as I trim and file and sand and scrape the cut down hull into something approaching a good fit. Not really a good fit, but approaching. For the amount of new parts this kit included, I was kind of surprised they didn't just make new hull sides, but this is fine, really. It's not an especially difficult thing to do. I'm glad I noticed before trying to install the upper hull parts. Sometimes paying attention to the instructions pays off. Before installing the new hull parts, I attach the bogies. All you really have to do here is make sure they're around the right way and relatively level. It really made sense to follow these with the return rollers. They pretty much just plop right into place. Drive sprockets come next, and because this kit has the dreaded rubber band tracks, you don't have to worry too much about how these are positioned. There isn't really a need for polycaps or keying or anything like that here. This piece here is the mount for the idler wheel. I think I've got these in the right position. It made sense to follow this with the idler wheels themselves. They're not difficult to position, though you may have to nudge and eyeball them a bit so they are as straight and neat as you can get them. The instructions wanted the idler wheels to go on later, but I've installed everything now at this point to make sure there's plenty of time for everything to bond. With rubber band tracks, the more solidly bonded and strong the running gear is, the better. I then assemble the muffler. There isn't any keying here, like with a lot of the parts, so you've got to eyeball it, and the result is, well, it's not perfect. I gave it a bit of a cleanup after putting it together once it had some time to bond. If you were really keen, you could drill out the end of the exhaust pipe. Obviously, I was not. Here's the front plate. I'm gluing a doodad onto it. Is this a flip-up light of some sort, or just a bulge? I've no idea, but it goes here. This piece of hull goes here. It goes into place easily enough, though it might be a little bit fiddly to get it properly vertical. We can simply use the next part to help with that. Both parts help each other getting lined up in the correct position, or something close to it. I then install that whole plate on the hull. There should be another angled piece to the left of the hatch opening, but it didn't seem to fit. I figured it wouldn't be seen, so I've omitted it. Getting this part into place did need a bit of kajiggering, but it seems to fit pretty well. I then install the lower hatch, and this is the first bit of hatch-related trouble. It does fit, but I wouldn't say it fits well. I kajiggered it so that it was just a little bit out of place on either side, instead of it being good on one side and quite bad on the other. It seemed like a sensible compromise. I then attached the new upper hull side parts. The fit is obviously not perfect, and the part on the right side should sit a little bit further forward. Or perhaps the left side should sit a bit further back. Not much, maybe a millimeter or two. It seemed fine at the time, that is, until I installed the engine deck part. Surely this is mostly my own fault. Can't really blame the kit for this. What I did to remedy it was nothing, really. I just put it together as neatly as I could. The bad looking parts could be covered with tarps or mud or tank riders or anything else you like. Certainly part of the hobby is creatively hiding errors. Not everything can be perfect, but imperfections can be hidden. The whole top goes into place easily enough, it just needs a bit of pressure. The whole rear also goes into place easily. It did need a bit of trimming to fit that tab on the left, but there were no real problems here. Now it's time for the dreaded rubber band tracks. When I first opened the box I thought these might be the worst part of the kit. I simply don't like rubber band tracks. And now that I've put them on the model, I've changed my mind. They are definitely not great, but they're not the worst part of the kit. My main complaint is that they're actually a little bit too long for the running gear. There's about 3 links too many. They also don't mesh with the drive sprocket teeth very well. They are squishy though, so you can just kind of force the teeth into the holes and hope the glue is enough to hold them. I'm sure somebody's going to say, "Oh, you're meant to melt them together, Herbert!" But that doesn't really work when you've had to cut them down. Also, gluing them to the wheels will stop them from flexing up and sitting above the wheels, which is something rubber band tracks always seem to like doing. Gluing them into place makes them look significantly better. I tried to link the ends of the links up so they'd sit on a road wheel to give them some support and something to hold on to. So they're not the best tracks, but they'll do. If you wanted, you could 3D print some new ones, or maybe buy a set of individual links, but I don't think it's really worth it for this kit. On the engine deck there's a couple of handles. The parts the instructions say to use don't fit, and because I'm a fool, I didn't test fit these particular parts. I ended up using a different pair of handles that didn't seem to be needed elsewhere. They don't quite look right, but they are there. This handle, a bit lower down the engine deck, did fit, but this one for the front of the hull didn't fit. It was just a bit too wide. I used it anyway. You may just be able to see a couple of indents half poking out from under the handle. These doodads go on I guess they're pivot points, on the bogie assemblies. They should go right into place, and most of them do. One of the mounting holes was full of plastic. I simply trimmed the pin off the doodad and eyeballed the position. On the rear plate I add a couple of brackets. These will hold the muffler, and I think I got them in the correct place, as best I could tell from looking at the instructions anyway. I leave that to bond while I attach the mud guards. As with a lot of the other parts, I did need to apply a little bit of pressure, but they go into place pretty easily. This cowl then goes on the engine deck, and surprisingly, there were no problems with this, unless you count a bit of gentle nudging as a problem. Then, the muffler goes into place. This didn't just drop into place like I'd hoped it would. I had to kajigger it a bit, and I wasn't totally satisfied with the fit. Maybe I did the brackets wrong. Maybe it's just a bad fit. Next, I assemble a spare wheel. You could probably do this at the same time as the rest of the wheels. Obviously, I didn't. I then give this stowage box a lid. There are parts to make more than one of these, but the instructions only indicate one. It made sense to me to install the support bracket doovers for the guards next, so I did that. There are sort of guides for the 2 forward ones, but the rear ones you'll just have to eyeball. It's nothing too tricky. I then install the spare wheel here. There is another hole in the guard on the other side, presumably for another spare wheel, but I only made one, and the instructions make no mention of putting one on the other side. By the time I realised there was another hole there, I just didn't care. The stowage box goes somewhere around here. It kind of hides some of that gap in the hull side, which is nice. This tool is supposed to go here, but it was just a bit too long, and it didn't look right, so I left it off. This can be explained away as some careless crew member leaving it behind somewhere. This tool did seem to fit, so I glued it into place. There's no keying or anything, you've just got to eyeball it. And on the other side, a shovel so holes can be dug, and an axe, probably for chopping. I almost forgot them, but there are headlamps that go into the little holes at the front of the guards here. Sorry, I mean Scheinwerfers. And here's one of the worst parts of this kit, the upper portion of this hatch. This is in fact the part the instructions say to use, but you can probably see that it really doesn't look right. It's not that it doesn't fit, it's just not right. Should there be an upper part on the hull top? I didn't see anything like that on the sprues, and the instructions show nothing at all. I guess we're meant to just kit bash something. There are other hatch parts on the sprues, and I did try some, but they weren't suitable. I don't know what the deal with this is. It's either garbage kit design, or I've made a horrible, horrible mistake. Quite possibly both. I guess the intention is that you kit bash a part for this, or maybe 3D print one, but I just don't care. So I'm not going to. I then used the locking tab mechanism to, well, sort of lock the turret into place. Because I didn't think to test fit it, the way I positioned the tab part means when the turret is facing forward, it isn't really locked into place. And that's entirely my mistake. I should have thought about it when I noticed that you have to attach your own tabs. I don't think it's really that big a deal. Plus, it's another example of Herbert making the mistake, so you don't have to. I'm really generous like that. Anyway, that's the 35th scale Vickers Armstrong Mk F 45 from Mirage Hobby completed. And, well, I'm not overly pleased with this kit, especially that hatch. I guess this is the kind of kit you would use if you were really determined to have this particular vehicle in model form and you didn't mind spending a bunch of time and effort to get it right. Personally, I didn't buy this because I had my heart set on having a Vickers Armstrong Mk F. I bought it because it was cheap and I thought it might be fun. Now I know why it was cheap. This is the second time I've built a Mirage Hobby kit, and the previous model, the Kubus, or Kubus, however you say that, wasn't especially good either. It is kind of disappointing, but I guess that's just part of the adventure of building a whole bunch of kits. Not all of them can be amazing. In fairness, I probably have encountered worse. Also, in fairness, a lot of the things that look bad with this model are probably my own fault. Not that hatch nonsense though, or the extra long tracks. Those are certainly not my doing. I'm sure this particular variant of the Vickers 6-ton is not the most common vehicle to find a model kit for, so this is probably great for those who really want one and don't mind putting in a lot of extra work, so obviously it has its place. I'm certainly not going to be in a rush to buy another Mirage Hobby kit though. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments section below. If you'd like to watch me build kits like this one live and get a laugh out of Herbert's frustration, I stream modelling a couple of times a week over on Twitch. Subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of thing, share the video with anybody you think might find it helpful, and if you really like what I do, please consider supporting on Patreon or Ko-fi. Take care of yourselves, be excellent to each other, and thanks for watching. Farewell.